So today I wanted to talk a little bit about a project that we've been working on in fulfillment for a while now, actually, and it's a fairly large project, and it's migrating the customers portal. And I wanted to talk about this project in more of a meta way, because this is a very large, very complicated project. And obviously we're still in the middle of it, so still a lot to learn, but I wanted to talk about how we've been thinking about MVCs and sequencing for a project like this. So before I dive into that, I want to just talk about what we're doing and what exactly it is. So we're moving all the functionality of the customers portal, which we refer to internally as customers dot, into GitLab.com for SaaS customers. So I'm actually going to jump out into the customers portal right now, because I'm not sure a lot of you have seen this. It's actually its own standalone website I'm on staging right now, for managing payment and license information. You can have your own login that's separate from your GitLab.com account, or you can SSO in with your GitLab.com account. If you have purchased a subscription from us, SaaS, self-managed, CI minutes, storage, etc. Sorry, staging's a little slow. You'll see them here on the managed purchases page. Most customers, this is a test account I have, so most customers don't have this many. But any sort of action you want to take around a subscription, upgrading, renewing, buying CI minutes, adding seats, buying storage, canceling. This is also this is a full website with, you have an account with account details, there's invoices, we have saved payment methods. This is like a pretty large piece of work, to think about migrating it into GitLab.com. So why are we doing this then? The customers portal is very confusing for users, especially our SaaS users. They're in SaaS, they say, okay, I want to buy a subscription, or I want to buy CI minutes. And then all of a sudden they're sent to this whole new website saying you need to log in. It's this standalone website. It's very confusing. There are a lot of troubles logging in because sometimes they're not aware that they went to a separate site, or even if they are aware that they went to a separate site, maybe they only use it once or twice a year. So what's my login? Is it the same as my GitLab login? No, it's not. We don't share databases. It's just confusing. And then the second part of this is, today subscriptions are associated with individuals. So I, as an individual, create a customers portal account, and then I purchase a subscription, and that subscription is tied to my user account. Really, subscriptions should be associated with companies or organizations, and users be the managers of those subscriptions. We've seen a lot of issues. Customers bring up these issues. For example, when someone leaves the company, a lot of times they don't realize their GitLab subscription was tied directly to that person's account. And so they have to reach out to support and get it transferred to someone else's account. It's a really big pain point for our customers that these subscriptions are on an individual level, and that as an individual, the subscription owner has to be the person that makes any amendments, upgrades, purchases additional seats for the subscription. So this is something that once we're in GitLab.com, we can address in a much better way. So complicating factors for this project, obviously the scope is huge. It's like a whole standalone website, and we're trying to copy all the functionality of it into GitLab.com. Secondly, information is just structured differently in GitLab.com versus customers dot. So in GitLab.com, or let me go back to customers dot actually. In customers dot, when you go to the managed purchases page, it is a centralized view of all of your subscriptions. Sorry, it's still loading. Staging's really slow. It's a centralized view of all your subscriptions. So if you have a self-managed and a SaaS subscription, they're all going to show up here. If you have CI minute subscriptions, they're all going to show up here. Versus in GitLab.com, if I want to get to my subscription, when I'm within this group, I'd go to settings billing. And if I have a subscription for a different group, I would go to settings billing on that page. We have determined that this sort of decentralized approach is the right one. Most customers, something like 95%, only have one subscription. So it really does make sense for it to be decentralized. But going back to like those complicating factors, like information and actions can't be moved one-to-one because it's a centralized versus a decentralized approach. We're dealing with people's money here. Like bugs have big consequences. And purchase and subscription management is just not optional if you have a subscription with us. There's also multiple systems at play here. So it's not just GitLab.com and customers. There's also Zora, there's Stripe. We pass information to Salesforce. There's lots of things happening on the back end. Certain information is stored in certain systems. So there's a lot going on the back end of this. And then special use cases. There are so many special use cases. We have EOA customers who are on special multi-year deals to ramp to premium, people with non-standard contract lengths, customers with discounted pricing, customers who have purchased through a reseller, customers who require a purchase order, customers who pay for overages through quarterly seat reconciliation versus yearly true-ups. There are just like a lot of different use cases here. So when thinking about MVC and how we're sequencing work, that was obviously like it's a pretty like big task that we're looking at here. So I wanted to just talk about like how we broke things down into MVC and talk about some examples. So we're trying to start with the most basic or like normal use case and then expand to other use cases later. So for us, that's the self-service customer with a standard contract length who pays for overages through quarterly seat reconciliation, which is our new way of paying for seat overages. So all those other special use cases I talked about, I open separate issues for those. I think about those a little like separately because each one of those is an issue all in itself. When I'm designing, I keep special use cases in mind and I think about how I'm going to solve for them in sort of broad strokes, but I don't really get into the weeds. So for example, like when I'm working on, how we're going to display subscriptions, I'm thinking about that normal use case where you have a single active subscription, but I'm also thinking about, okay, expired subscriptions, future dated subscriptions, subscriptions with non-standard contract lengths, and making sure that the framework is able to accommodate them, but not getting like too into the weeds on how exactly that sort of thing looks. And then don't be afraid to leave out functionality if it's not absolutely necessary. The very first flow that we moved was the purchase flow for like your main subscription, so premium or ultimate. And in the customers portal today, if you previously had an account with us, we'll autofill your information. So like your saved credit card, saved address. For our MVC in GitLab.com, we don't do that. You have to input it every time. And yes, it's less functionality than we have in the customers portal, but it wasn't absolutely necessary for MVC. So that's a cut that we made in order to reduce the scope. And then in terms of sequencing, get lots of input from developers on high level ideas. I want to show something really ugly that I shared really early on in this process when I was just trying to get a handle on like, okay, what is all the information from both systems? How can we group it? How might we like, where might this information sort of slot across different pages? And, this is just sort of like the bare minimum that you'd need to convey an idea. But I shared it and it was ugly. And I like sharing ugly stuff actually. And, later we sort of like, I was exploring things on a slightly more detailed level, but still ugly wireframes. And so now we're sort of in like a more detailed wireframe stage, but yeah, don't be afraid to share those super ugly early things. Think about dependencies, not just from a technical perspective, because there are plenty of technical dependencies, but also from a UX perspective. So something that I did recently is I went through and thought about, from both the technical and UX perspective, sort of what is the order that we should tackle some of these things? Because from a UX perspective, there are dependencies. So for example, here I'm saying that we need to do the account info page, which would be where we'd show saved information like saved credit cards, saved addresses, before we can pre-fill information into purchase flows. Technically, from a technical perspective, we could actually pre-fill information before, because we are saving it on the back end. We are saving it in the customer's account. But it's kind of weird from a user perspective if you don't know where that information is being saved, and then all of a sudden we're auto-populating it. It's sort of like, where is that information? How can I edit it? So, thinking about those sort of UX dependencies as well as technical dependencies. And then as a designer, you're probably the person on the team that's thinking about the project most holistically, and share that vision with the team. That's sort of honestly where this came from. Is a developer asked me about autofilling information in checkout flows. And I realized that I'd been thinking about that, and I'd been thinking about the sequencing a bit within the larger project, but I hadn't communicated that very clearly. So that's when I sort of went through and was like, okay, let's talk about phase 1, phase 2, what's the order that we're going to tackle these things in, and why, sort of giving a little bit of an example of why. And then finally, for a project this big, you can't communicate too much. This project has gone on so long. We have developers on the team that weren't here when we started, lots of people on the team that weren't here when we started. So don't assume that people know things. I like to link back to old issues in my comments, like, hey, for some context, check this out. And just to give people that context, to provide that sort of helpful links section. And that's all I have.